Hello and welcome. You're welcome to comment your city and the time below. I always enjoy reading them. If you find these stories interesting, please consider subscribing. Let's start tonight's story. I took the night clerk position at the Coastal House Inn on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, which should have been my first warning. Nobody hires for overnight shifts in the middle of the week unless they're desperate, and nobody gets desperate unless people keep leaving. The inn sat on a narrow strip of Gulf Coast about 40 minutes south of Clearwater, wedged between State Road 679 and a stretch of beach that never quite made it into the tourism brochures. On one side, a salt marsh inlet. On the other hand, a beach access road that dead-ended at a boat launch nobody used anymore, the kind of place that survived on charter fishermen, last-minute bookings, and people who needed to disappear for a weekend without anyone asking why. I needed the job. My rent was 3 weeks overdue, my car inspection had expired, and my credit cards were maxed out from helping my brother through rehab. The Coastal House Inn paid $12 an hour for the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights a week. It wasn't much, but it was immediate, and the day manager, a man named Martin with tired eyes and a name tag that looked like it had survived a decade of salt air, promised me I'd mostly be alone. "It's easy work," he said, walking me through the cramped lobby that smelled like industrial lemon cleaner and something underneath it. Something damp and organic, like mildew that had learned to hide. Check people in, answer the phone, keep the coffee going, lock up at midnight, and if anyone needs anything after that, you use the night bell system. The carpet was a faded teal color, worn thin near the entrance, and it always felt slightly damp under my shoes, even though I never saw water on it. The walls were painted that specific shade of beige that only exists in budget hotels and DMV waiting rooms. There were fake plants in the corners, a computer system that looked like it ran on Windows XP, and a bulletin board covered in faded hurricane evacuation routes. Martin showed me how to process credit cards, how to override the room key system, and how to use the ancient security monitor in the back office. A small windowless room that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet glue. He explained the cash drop procedure, the pool gate lock, and the Wi-Fi password reset process. All standard stuff. I nodded along, taking notes on my phone, thinking this was going to be the easiest job I'd ever had. Then, just as he was about to leave, Martin paused near the door. He reached into a drawer behind the front desk and pulled out a small booklet. It was water-stained, the pages slightly warped, spiral-bound with a faded blue cover that read, "Coastal House Rules, Night Shift." "You'll want to read this tonight," he said, sliding it across the counter. "It's important." I flipped through it casually. Some of the rules were normal. Complete cash drop by 11:45 p.m. Ensure pool gate is locked after 10 p.m. Do not leave front desk unattended for more than 5 minutes. But then there were others. Rules that made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Do not assign anyone to room 17 if they arrive after midnight. If a guest asks about the third floor, tell them we don't have one. If you smell seawater in the lobby, check the front doors. Do not check the hallway. If you see a woman in a white sun hat on the security cameras, turn the monitor off immediately. Do not zoom in. I looked up at Martin, half smiling, waiting for the punchline. "Is this a joke?" I asked. "Like a hazing thing for new hires?" Martin didn't smile back. He adjusted his name tag, glanced at the hallway leading to the guest rooms, and then looked back at me with an expression that was hard to read. Something between pity and relief. "Just follow the rules," he said quietly. "Exactly as they're written. Don't improvise. Don't test them. And if something feels wrong, trust the booklet, not your instincts." He left before I could ask him what he meant. I stood there in the empty lobby, the hum of the ancient air conditioning unit filling the silence, and read through the booklet again. There were 12 rules in total, written in different handwriting styles, as if they'd been added over time by different people. Some were typed. Some were handwritten in blue ink. One was scribbled in pencil, barely legible. Never allow wet footprints past the lobby tile. I told myself it was Florida. Every old building down here had weird superstitions. Ghost tours, Seminole burial grounds, hurricane folklore. This was probably just some quirky local color to make the job feel more interesting. Maybe even a running gag among staff to freak out the new hires. But as I sat down behind the desk and the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the lobby in long shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling that Martin hadn't been joking at all. The first guest of my shift checked in at 11:20 p.m., a middle-aged man with a fishing cooler and a sunburnt neck. He barely looked at me, paid in cash, and asked for a room on the first floor. I gave him room 8. He nodded, took his key, and disappeared down the hallway without another word. I locked the front doors at midnight, just like the booklet said. I turned off the exterior lights except for the entrance sign. I made a fresh pot of coffee that nobody would drink. And I sat there alone, listening to the building settle around me. Outside, the wind picked up, dragging palm fronds across the asphalt like fingernails on glass. The Gulf was less than 100 yards away, hidden behind a line of scrub pines and sand dunes, but I could hear it. Low, rhythmic, patient. At 12:40 a.m., I smelled it. Seawater, not the distant, briny scent of the coast. This was immediate, fresh, sharp, like someone had just opened a door to the beach and let the surf pour into the building. I looked around the lobby. No open windows, no wet floors, nothing out of place, but the smell was undeniable. Growing stronger, filling the air with salt and something else. Something deeper, like wet sand and old wooden pilings rotting beneath a pier. My eyes went to the booklet, still open on the desk. If you smell seawater in the lobby, check the front doors. Do not check the hallway. I stood up slowly, my pulse quickening, and walked to the front entrance. I checked the double doors. Locked, dry, sealed tight. I checked the side exit near the pool. Also locked. But the smell was getting worse. It was coming from behind me now, from the hallway that led to the guest rooms. I turned slowly and looked down the corridor. The lights were on, buzzing faintly, casting their sterile fluorescent glow on the teal carpet and beige walls. But something was wrong. The hallway looked longer than it should have been, like it stretched farther than the building's actual footprint would allow. And at the far end, where the hallway should have turned toward the stairwell, it was darker, almost like the lights there had burned out, or like the corridor bent away into some other space entirely. I took a step toward it. The lights flickered. I froze. The smell intensified, rolling toward me like an invisible wave, and for just a second, maybe less, I heard something. A sound like wet footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. My hand shot out and grabbed the edge of the desk, pulling myself back. I forced my eyes away from the hallway, my heart hammering in my chest, and I sat down hard in the chair. The smell faded almost immediately, like it had never been there at all. I sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the booklet, my hands trembling slightly. The rules weren't a joke. There were instructions for avoiding something's attention, and I had almost given it mine. The rest of that first shift passed in a kind of numb autopilot. I answered the phone twice, both times guests asking about checkout times. I restocked the coffee station. I watched the security monitor cycle through its grainy feeds. Parking lot, pool deck, side entrance, hallway. Everything looked normal, static, empty. But I couldn't stop thinking about the smell. I kept glancing at the hallway, expecting to see something, someone standing there. But it remained empty, the lights steady, the carpet dry. By the time the sun started to rise and the day shift manager arrived, I felt like I'd aged a year. "How was it?" Martin asked, setting his keys on the counter. "Quiet," I lied. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Good. That's good." I wanted to ask him if he'd ever smelled seawater in the lobby, if he'd ever seen the hallway look wrong. But something in his expression stopped me. He already knew, and he wasn't going to talk about it. I went home, slept poorly, and came back the next night. The second shift started the same way. Lock the doors, make coffee, sit at the desk. The building was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant crash of waves beyond the dunes. A couple checked in around 11:30 p.m., tourists with a cooler full of beer and sand still on their flip-flops. I gave them room 12. They thanked me and disappeared down the hallway, laughing about something I didn't hear. At 12:42 a.m., the smell came back. Seawater. Immediate and strong, like someone had dragged a fishing net full of kelp into the lobby and left it to rot. This time I didn't hesitate. I stayed in my chair, kept my eyes on the desk, and waited. The smell grew stronger. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in the silence. My hands gripped the edge of the counter, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Wet. Slow. Coming from the hallway. Not the sharp click of shoes or the soft pad of bare feet. These were heavy dragging, accompanied by a faint dripping sound, like someone walking through shallow water, leaving puddles with every step. I forced myself to keep staring at the desk, in the booklet, at the wood grain, anywhere but the yacht, hallway. The footsteps stopped. The smell lingered for another 30 seconds, thick and oppressive, and then it faded all at once like someone had shut a door I couldn't see. I sat there until my shift ended, not moving, barely breathing. When Martin arrived in the morning, he looked at me and said, "You followed the rules." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Good," he said. "Keep doing that." On my third night, I wasn't alone. A guy named Ethan showed up around midnight. He was part of the maintenance crew, mid-30s, perpetually smirking, the kind of guy who thought everything was a joke until it punched him in the face. He'd worked at the Coastal House for 2 years on and off, mostly doing repairs and covering security gaps during busy weekends. "They got you reading the spooky book," he said, leaning against the desk and grinning. "That thing's hilarious." I looked up from the booklet. "You don't follow it?" "Hell no," he said, laughing. "It's just something they made up to mess with new people. Keeps the job interesting, you know. Don't go in the hallway, don't look at the cameras. Come on, man, it's Florida. Every hotel's got weird ghost stories." I didn't argue. I wasn't sure what I believed yet, but I knew what I'd smelled, what I'd heard. Ethan pulled up a chair and opened his phone, scrolling through something. "You want to see the security room?" he asked. "It's actually kind of cool. You can see the whole property from back there." I hesitated, then nodded. I wanted to see what the cameras showed when the hallway looked wrong. We went into the back office. It was smaller than I remembered, crammed with an old desk, a mini fridge, and a wall-mounted monitor showing a grid of 6 camera feeds. Parking lot, pool, side entrance, lobby, hallway, beach access road. Ethan pointed at a sticky note attached to the bottom of the monitor. It was yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. "If you see the woman in the white sun hat, turn the monitor off. Do not zoom in." "See?" Ethan said, laughing. "That's what I'm talking about. Who writes this stuff?" I stared at the note. The handwriting matched one of the entries in the booklet. "Maybe someone who saw her," I said quietly. Ethan rolled his eyes. "Right, sure." We watched the feeds for a few minutes. Everything was still, empty, normal. And then the feed glitched. It was subtle at first, a flicker in the pool camera, a brief static burst, but when the image stabilized, someone was standing by the pool gate. A woman. She wore a white sun hat. the wide-brimmed kind people wear to block the Florida sun. She stood perfectly still, facing the camera, her arms at her sides. Ethan leaned forward. Huh. Didn't see her walk up. I felt my stomach drop. Turn it off. What? Why? Turn it off, Ethan. He ignored me. Instead, he reached for the mouse and clicked on the feed, zooming in. The image sharpened. The woman's face came into focus, and it was wrong. Not deformed, not monstrous. Just erased. Like someone had taken an eraser to a photograph and smudged out her features, leaving only a blank flesh-colored oval where her face should have been. Ethan stopped laughing. What the hell? He whispered. The woman's head tilted upward slowly, smoothly, like she was looking directly into the camera, directly at us. The monitor went black, not static, not a glitch. Just black, like someone had pressed the power button from the inside. Ethan stared at the screen, his face pale. That's not a person. I didn't respond. I was already backing out of the room, my heart pounding. The monitor stayed black for the rest of the night. At 2:47 a.m., the lobby phone rang. I looked at the caller ID display. It showed an internal extension. Room 17. I stared at it, my hand hovering over the receiver. The booklet was still open on the desk, the rule clear. Do not answer room 17 after midnight. The phone rang again, and again. Loud, shrill, insistent. Ethan stood. Behind me, his earlier bravado gone. Aren't you going to answer that? No, I said. What if someone's in trouble? Room 17 is empty, I said, my voice flat. I checked the system, nobody's assigned to it. The phone rang a fourth time, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Ethan left 20 minutes later, mumbling something about needing to check the boiler. He didn't come back. I sat alone at the desk, staring at the hallway, at the phone, at the dark monitor in the back room. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. The rules weren't there to protect the guests. They were there to protect me. Ethan didn't show up for the next 2 nights. When I asked Martin about him, he just shrugged and said Ethan had called in sick. But there was something in the way he said it, too casual, too practiced, that made me think Martin knew exactly why Ethan wasn't coming back. I didn't push it. I was too focused on following the rules, on keeping my head down and making it through each shift without incident. I memorized the booklet. I kept my eyes on the lobby tile boundary. I never looked at the monitor after midnight, and I sure as hell didn't answer the phone when room 17 appeared on the caller ID. But on my 6th night, Ethan came back. He walked into the lobby around 11:45 p.m., and I knew immediately that something was off. He looked thinner. His eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept since I'd last seen him. He moved differently too, slower, more cautious, like someone who'd learned to walk carefully in the dark. Hey, he said, his voice flat. You okay? I asked. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at the hallway, his jaw working like he was trying to find the right words. I saw her again, he finally said. Who? The woman, in the hat. He turned to look at me, and I saw something in his expression that made my skin crawl. Fear, yes, but also recognition, like he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to see, and now he couldn't unsee it. She was in my apartment. I felt my throat tighten. What do you mean she was in your apartment? I woke up 2 nights ago and she was standing in my bedroom doorway, just standing there, same hat, same blank face. His hands were shaking. I turned on the light and she was gone, but I could still smell it. Smell what? Seawater. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and cold. I wanted to tell him to leave, to go home, quit the job and move to another state. But before I could say anything, he walked past me toward the back office. Ethan, wait. I need to see the cameras again, he said, his voice tight. I need to know if she's real. She's real, I said, following him. That's the problem. He didn't listen. He was already in the security room, booting up the monitor. The feeds flickered to life one by one. Parking lot, pool, side entrance, lobby, hallway, beach road. Everything looked normal. Ethan stared at the screen, his jaw clenched. She's not there. Good, I said, turn it off. No. He leaned closer, his finger hovering over the mouse. I need to see her again. I need to understand what she is. Ethan, don't... He clicked on the pool feed and zoomed in. The image sharpened. The pool deck was empty, the gate locked, the water still in black under the dim security lights. And then she appeared, not walking into frame, not emerging from the shadows. She was just there, standing at the edge of the pool, her back to the camera, wearing the same wide-brimmed white sun hat. Ethan sucked in a breath. There, you see her? I did, and I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The woman stood perfectly still for 5 seconds. 10, 15. Then slowly she turned around. Her face, or the absence of it, came into view. That same blank flesh-colored void where her features should have been. No eyes, no mouth. Just smooth, empty skin stretched over a skull that didn't seem quite human. Ethan made a sound, like he was choking. The woman tilted her head bird-like as if listening. And then she stepped forward directly toward the camera, closing the distance in a way that didn't match the perspective. One step and she was 5 feet closer. Another step and she was right up against the lens, her faceless head filling the entire screen. The monitor went black again, but this time it didn't stay black. White text appeared on the screen, pixelated and jagged like it was being typed in real time. Room 17. Ethan stumbled backward, knocking into the desk. What the... The lobby phone rang. We both froze. The sound cut through the silence like a scream, shrill and insistent. I walked out of the security room, my legs moving on autopilot, and looked at the caller ID. Room 17. Don't answer it, Ethan whispered from behind me. I didn't. I just stood there, watching the phone ring, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack a rib. The phone rang 6 times, then it stopped. The silence that followed felt wrong, too thick, too heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. Ethan walked up beside me, his face pale. We should check the room. No, I said immediately. What if someone's actually in there? Nobody's in there, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. The system shows it's empty. It's been empty since I started. That room doesn't get rented out. Then why does it keep calling? I didn't have an answer. Ethan looked at me, then at the hallway, then back at me. I'm going to check. Ethan, don't. But he was already moving, walking toward the hallway with the kind of desperate determination that comes from needing to prove something. To prove that the rules were fake, that the fear was irrational, that there was a logical explanation for everything. I wanted to stop him. I should have stopped him, but I didn't. I stood there, frozen, as he disappeared down the corridor. The hallway lights flickered once as he passed beneath them. Waited. 1 minute, 2. At the 3-minute mark, I heard a door open. Not the heavy click of a modern hotel lock, but the old creaking sound of a wooden door that hadn't been opened in years. And then Ethan screamed. It wasn't a horror movie scream. It wasn't dramatic. It was raw and sharp and full of a kind of terror I'd never heard before. The sound of someone realizing all at once that they'd made a terrible mistake. The scream cut off abruptly, like someone had pressed mute. The hallway lights went out. I stood there in the lobby, my entire body locked in place, staring into the darkness where Ethan had just been. For a long time, nothing happened. And then I heard footsteps. Slow, wet, dragging, coming back toward the lobby. I grabbed the booklet and flipped through it with shaking hands, looking for a rule I might have missed, something that would tell me what to do. There was nothing. The footsteps stopped just beyond the edge of the lobby tile where the carpet transitioned to the hallway. I didn't look up. I couldn't. And then a voice spoke, low, calm, familiar. "Hey." It was Ethan's voice, but it wasn't Ethan. "Can you let me back in?" the voice said. I think I locked myself out. I kept my eyes on the desk, my hands gripping the booklet so hard my knuckles turned white. "Please," the voice said, closer now. "I just need to get back to the desk. I'm freezing." I heard water dripping onto the tile. Slowly, I reached for the phone and dialed the day manager's emergency number. It rang twice before Martin answered, his voice groggy. "What's wrong?" "Something's in the hallway," I whispered. There was a pause. Then, "Don't look at it. Don't speak to it. Stay behind the desk until sunrise." Ethan went into room 17. "I know," Martin said quietly. "Stay where you are." He hung up. I sat there alone, listening to the thing that sounded like Ethan breathing just beyond the lobby boundary. It stayed there until the sun came up. When the daylight finally poured through the front windows, I looked toward the hallway. It was empty, dry, normal. Ethan never came back to work, and room 17 stayed empty. But every night after that, at exactly 2:47 a.m., the phone would ring, and the caller ID always said the same thing. Room 17. After Ethan disappeared, and I had to think of it that way, disappeared because calling it anything else would mean acknowledging something I wasn't ready to face, I started paying closer attention to the booklet, not just reading the rules, but studying them, looking for patterns, trying to understand what I was actually dealing with. Most of the rules were prohibitions. Don't do this. Don't acknowledge that. Don't go here after midnight. They were written like warnings, yes, but also like containment procedures. Like someone was trying to keep something locked away, and the rules were the locks. One rule in particular kept catching my eye. If a guest asks about the third floor, tell them we don't have one. The Coastal House Inn was a 4-story building. I could see that from the outside. I could count the windows. Ground floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. Simple geometry, but inside, the elevator panel only showed buttons for floors 1, 2, and 4. Where the 3 button should have been, there was just a smooth metal plate scratched and dented like someone had tried to pry it open. The edges were rough, the metal slightly warped, as if the button had been forcibly removed and then covered over. I'd noticed it on my first day, but assumed it was just a quirk of the building's layout. Maybe the third floor was used for storage or maintenance, or had been sealed off due to water damage. Florida hotels were full of half-finished renovations and code violations papered over with fresh paint. But the more I looked at that blank space, the more wrong it felt. On my 8th night, I went looking for answers. There was an old filing cabinet behind the front desk, stuffed with incident reports, maintenance logs, and guest complaint forms dating back to the early 2000s. Most of it was mundane: broken air conditioners, noise complaints, and refund requests. But buried in the back of the bottom drawer, I found a binder labeled "Internal Use Only" in faded red letters. Inside were incident reports that didn't match the tone of the others. They were short, vague, repetitive. Guest relocated due to water damage, room 32. Noise complaint, 3rd floor, resolved. Unscheduled maintenance, 3rd floor corridor, completed. Guest reported disorientation, checked out early. One report, dated October 2019, had a handwritten note scribbled in the margin in blue ink. "We don't have a 3rd floor, but the building does." I read it 3 times, my pulse quickening. I flipped through more pages. Another report from 2017. The guest claims to have taken the elevator to the 3rd floor. No such floor exists. The guest checked out the same day. Refund issued. And another from 2015. Housekeeper refuses to service rooms above the 2nd floor, reassigned. I sat there in the dim light of the lobby, the binder open on my lap, trying to make sense of it. The third floor existed. The building had it. But the hotel didn't acknowledge it, didn't assign rooms there, didn't send housekeeping, didn't put it on the elevator panel. Why? I looked up at the ceiling, at the acoustic tiles and the flickering fluorescent lights, and I listened. The building was quiet. The air conditioning hummed. The distant surf rolled beyond the dunes, and then I heard it. A thud. Dull. Heavy. Directly above me, like someone had dropped something on the floor upstairs. I held my breath, staring at the ceiling. Another thud, then another. Slow and rhythmic, like footsteps. But I was on the ground floor. The guest rooms above me were on the second floor. I could see the room assignments on my computer. Only 3 rooms were occupied tonight, all on the first floor. The second floor was empty. The footsteps continued, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other, then stopping directly above the front desk. I grabbed the booklet, flipping through it, but there was no rule about sounds from above. No instructions for what to do if you heard footsteps on a floor that wasn't supposed to exist. The thudding stopped. For 10 seconds there was silence. And then I heard something else. A dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor above me. Slow, deliberate, accompanied by a faint creaking as if the floorboards themselves were protesting. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the tile, and walked toward the elevator. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that the third floor wasn't real, that the sounds were just old pipes or settling foundations or rats in the walls. Or maybe part of me needed to see it. I pressed the call button. The elevator dinged softly and the doors slid open. Stepped inside. The panel stared back at me. 1, 2, blank space, 4. I reached out and touched the metal plate where the 3 button should have been. It was warm, not hot, not cold, just warm, like someone had been pressing their hand against it from the other side. I pulled my hand back. The elevator doors started to close, and just before they shut completely, the lights inside the elevator flickered. For half a second, the metal plate glowed faintly, and I saw something etched into it, scratched into the surface in thin, jagged lines. Don't ask. The doors closed. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering, and returned to the desk. I didn't hear the footsteps again that night. But when I checked the guest logs the next morning, I found something that made my stomach turn. 3 guests had checked out early. All of them had been assigned rooms on the second floor. All of them had requested to leave before sunrise, refusing to give a reason. One of them had left a note on the receipt. It was written in shaky handwriting, barely legible. I heard someone walking above my room all night. You told me there was no third floor. Martin arrived at 7 a.m., same as always, and I showed him the note. He read it, sighed, and tucked it into his pocket. Did they pay for the full night? He asked. Yes, but then it's fine. Martin, what's on the third floor? He looked at me for a long moment, his tired eyes unreadable. There is no third floor, he said quietly. And you're going to keep saying that no matter who asks. Understand? I wanted to argue, to demand answers. But the look on his face stopped me. He wasn't being dismissive. He wasn't brushing me off. He was terrified. Understand? He repeated. I nodded. He left without another word. That night I heard the footsteps again, and this time they were closer. On my 10th night she arrived. I didn't hear her come in. I didn't see her approach. One moment I was alone at the desk, filling out a maintenance request, form for a broken ice machine. And the next moment she was standing in front of me, silent as a held breath. She was older, mid-60s maybe, with steel gray hair pulled back in a loose bun and the kind of face that looked like it had spent decades staring into fluorescent lights and making peace with things that couldn't be explained. She wore a faded Coastal House Inn polo shirt and carried a ring of keys that jangled softly when she moved. "You're the new night clerk," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said, trying not to sound startled. I know who you are." She glanced at the hallway, then back at me. Her eyes were sharp, clear, and deeply tired. "I'm Caroline. I've been cleaning this place since 2003. I'd never seen her before, but then again, I only worked nights. The housekeeping staff came and went during the day, invisible to me. "Nice to meet you," I said awkwardly. She didn't respond. Instead, she walked around the desk and stood beside me, her gaze fixed on the booklet lying open near the keyboard. "You've been following the rules," she said. Again, not a question. "Yeah." "Good." She pulled up a chair and sat down, her movements slow and deliberate, like someone who'd learned not to make unnecessary noise. "That's why you're still here." I swallowed. "What happened to the last night clerk?" "Same thing that happens to all of them." She looked at me, her expression flat. "They stopped following the rules." The weight of that sentence settled over me like a wet blanket. "What is this place?" I asked quietly. "What's really going on here?" Caroline was silent for a long moment. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small laminated card, the kind you'd use for a checklist or a quick reference guide. She slid it across the desk toward me. It was a list of names. 12 names, written in neat handwriting, each one followed by a year. "These are the night clerks who worked here before you," she said, "going back to 2008. Nuln." Scanned the list, some names I didn't recognize, but one of them I did. Ethan Morrison, 2023. My throat tightened. What happened to them? "Most of them quit after a week. A few lasted a month." She tapped the list. "2 of them didn't leave. They just stopped showing up. We found their cars in the parking lot, keys still in the ignition, doors open, but they were gone." "And nobody called the police?" Caroline laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, we called. They came, they looked around, they filed reports, and then they left, same as everyone else." She leaned back in her chair. "Nobody wants to investigate a hotel that smells like seawater and has footsteps on a floor that doesn't exist." I stared at the list, my hands trembling slightly. "Why do you stay?" I asked. "Because someone has to." She looked toward the hallway, her jaw tight. "This place was built wrong. That's the simplest way to put it. The land underneath us used to be open water, a marsh inlet, a tidal basin. After Hurricane Elena in 1985, the whole area got reshaped. They reclaimed the land, filled it in with dredged sand and limestone, and built the hotel on top of it." "So what?" "Lots of coastal buildings are built on reclaimed land." "Not like this." Caroline's voice dropped. "They didn't just fill in the marsh, they built on top of old foundations. Structures that were already here. Pilings from an old fishing camp. Remains of a boathouse. Maybe other things." She paused. "Things that were left when the water took them." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "You're saying the hotel is haunted?" "No." She shook her head. "Haunted would be easier. Ghosts are memories, echoes. They don't think. They don't plan." She looked at me, her eyes hard. "What's here isn't a ghost. It's a pattern, a tide. It moves through the building like water moves through sand. Slow, patient, always looking for a way in." "A way into what?" "To you." She tapped the booklet. "The rules exist because people kept offering it what it wanted. Attention, permission, acknowledgement. Every time someone looked where they shouldn't, answered when they shouldn't, crossed a boundary they shouldn't, they were opening a door. And once the door is open, it doesn't close." I thought about Ethan, about the wet footsteps, about the phone calls from room 17. "How do you stop it?" "You don't." Caroline stood up, adjusting her keys. "You follow the rules. You don't feed it. You don't give it an invitation. And if it tries to trick you, If it wears a familiar face, uses a familiar voice, asks you for help, you refuse. What if someone's actually in danger? Her expression softened just slightly. Then you make a choice, and you live with it or you don't. She started to walk toward the door, then stopped and turned back. There's one rule that's not in the booklet, she said, because it's the hardest one to follow. What is it? If a guest comes to the desk dripping wet but it hasn't rained, not hand them a towel. Hand them their receipt and ask them to leave. I frowned. Why? Because towels are invitations, she said quietly. Comfort is permission. The moment you offer help to something that doesn't need it, you're telling it that it's welcome, that it belongs. And once you do that, it won't leave. She walked out of the lobby without another word, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. I sat there, staring at the list of names, my mind racing. 12 night clerks, 12 people who'd sat in this same chair, read the same booklet, heard the same footsteps, and I was number 13. I looked at the hallway, at the flickering lights, at the faint smell of seawater that was starting to creep into the lobby again. And I wondered how long I'd last. It happened on my 14th night. I'd started to fall into a rhythm by then, a grim, superstitious routine that felt more like a ritual than a job. Lock the doors at midnight, make coffee nobody would drink, keep the booklet open on the desk like a talisman. Never look at the hallway for more than 3 seconds. Never answer the phone after 2:30 a.m. Never ever acknowledge the smell of seawater. I'd convinced myself I could do this, that I could follow the rules, collect my paycheck, and get out before whatever lived in the coastal house decided I was worth its attention. But at 2:13 a.m., a man walked into the lobby and everything I thought I knew shattered. He came through the front doors, unlocked even though I was sure I'd locked them, and stood just inside the entrance, dripping wet. Not damp, not rain-soaked. Drenched as he'd just climbed out of the Gulf. Water streamed from his clothes, pooling on the tile, running in thin rivulets toward the carpet boundary. His hair was plastered to his skull. His bare feet left wet prints with every step. And tangled around his left ankle, clinging to his pant leg, was a thick strand of seaweed. Dark green and glistening under the lobby lights. He was shaking. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse and desperate. "I need help." Every instinct I had screamed at me to help him. He looked real, he sounded real, he was terrified. But I'd read the rule a dozen times. Never allow wet footprints past the lobby tile. I stayed behind the desk, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you need me to call someone?" He took a step forward, his wet foot crossing from the tile onto the edge of the carpet. Water seeped into the teal fibers. "The water," he said, his eyes wide. "It came from the hallway. It was everywhere. I don't know how I got outside. Sir, I need you to stay on the tile," I said, my voice firmer now. He looked down at his feet, confused, and then back at me. "What?" "I just need a towel. I'm freezing." A towel. I thought of Caroline's words. Towels are invitations. Comfort is permission. "I can't give you a towel," I said. His expression shifted, just slightly. The fear in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something else. Something colder. "Why not?" he asked. "Hotel policy," I said, the lie tasting like rust in my mouth. "I need to process your checkout first. What room were you in?" He stared at me for a long moment, water dripping from his fingertips, pooling on the tile at his feet. "I wasn't in a room," he said quietly. My blood turned to ice. "Then I can't help you," I said. "I'm sorry, you need to leave." He didn't move. "Please," he said again, and this time his voice cracked. "I just need help. Just a towel. Just something warm, please." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to grab a towel from the supply closet, wrap it around his shoulders, make him coffee, and call 911. I wanted to be human, but I looked at his feet, at the wet prints leading from the door to where he stood, and I saw the way the water pooled, not spreading naturally, but moving, crawling. It was searching for a path deeper into the building. "I'm sorry," I said. "I can't." His face changed. Not into a monster, not into something inhuman. It just settled, like a mask being lowered into place. The fear drained from his eyes, replaced by a calm, patient disappointment. And then he smiled. "You're good at this," he said softly. I felt my stomach drop. He tilted his head, studying me. "Better than the last one." He opened the door for me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The man, if that's what he'd ever been, took a step backward toward the entrance. "I know your name," he said. I froze. "I know where you live. I know what you're afraid of." His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And I know you'll make a mistake eventually. Everyone does." He turned and walked toward the door. And as he stepped outside, I heard it. A sound like surf crashing against the building's exterior walls. Low, rhythmic, impossibly close. The smell of seawater flooded the lobby, thick and choking. The lights flickered, and then just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The man was gone. The water on the tile evaporated in seconds, leaving only faint salt stains behind. I stood there, shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I'd followed the rule, I'd refused, but it knew my name now. And I realized with a sick, creeping certainty that the rules weren't there to protect me from it. They were there to delay the inevitable. At 3 a.m., I called Caroline. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but alert. "What happened?" I told her everything. The man, the water, the seaweed, the way he knew my name. She was silent for a long time. "You did the right thing," she finally said. "Then why do I feel like I'm going to die?" "Because now it knows you're not easy." Her voice was low, tired. "That makes you interesting. And that's worse. What do I do? You keep following the rules, you don't engage, you don't acknowledge, and you don't, under any circumstances, feel sorry for it." "We feel sorry for it?" "It feeds on empathy," she said, "on compassion, on the part of you that wants to help. That's how it gets in. It makes you think you're doing the right thing. And by the time you realize you're not, it's too late." I hung up and sat in the silence of the lobby, staring at the empty tile where the man had stood. I thought about Ethan, about the night clerks before me, about the way the building seemed to breathe when I wasn't paying attention. And I wondered if I'd already made a mistake, if refusing the man had been the right move, or if it had just marked me as prey that would take longer to catch. The phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. Room 17. I didn't answer. But as I sat there, listening to the phone ring over and over, I heard something else. Footsteps. Upstairs. On the floor that didn't exist. Getting closer. The phone rang 19 times before it stopped. I counted everyone. I sat there behind the desk, my hands clenched into fists, staring at the caller ID as it blinked room 17 over and over, the shrill ringing cutting through the silence like a scream. When it finally stopped, the quiet that followed was worse. I could hear my own breathing, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant crash of waves beyond the dunes, and then the phone rang again. Same extension, same impossible room. This time I didn't just let it ring. I picked up the receiver, didn't press it to my ear, just lifted it off the cradle and immediately hung it back up. The ringing stopped. For 10 seconds the lobby was silent, and then the phone erupted, not ringing, screaming. A high-pitched, warbling shriek that didn't sound like a phone at all. It sounded like feedback, like nails on metal, like something dying and trying to pull you down with it. I stumbled backward, knocking my chair into the wall, and the sound cut off abruptly. The silence that followed felt like a living thing pressing against my ears. I grabbed the booklet, flipping through it, with shaking hands, looking for any rule I might have missed. Anything that would tell me what to do. There was nothing. And then the elevator dinged. I turned slowly toward the sound. The elevator doors were opening. Nobody had called it. Nobody was inside. The panel above the doors flickered, cycling through the floor numbers. 1, 2, blank space where 3 should be. 4, and then it stopped. The display glowed faintly, showing a number that shouldn't exist. The doors stayed open. I could see inside the elevator now. It was empty, normal. The same dull beige walls, the same scratched metal panel. But something was wrong with the air inside it. It looked thicker, like I was staring at the elevator through a pane of smudged glass. And then I smelled it. Seawater, fresh and sharp, pouring out of the elevator like an invisible tide. The lights in the lobby flickered, once, twice. And then the hallway lights went out completely. I grabbed the edge of the desk, my pulse hammering, and forced myself to stay behind the counter, to not move, to not look. But I heard it anyway. Wet footprints, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway, not walking toward the lobby, walking around it like something was pacing the perimeter, testing the boundaries. Drip, step, drip, step. The sound moved from the hallway entrance past the vending machines toward the side exit and then back again, circling, searching. I kept my eyes locked on the desk, my hands gripping the booklet as it could protect me. The footsteps stopped, and then I heard a voice, low, calm, familiar. Just let me check in. It was my voice, not similar, not close, exactly my voice. I felt my stomach lurch. The voice came again, closer now, from somewhere just beyond the edge of the desk. Come on. You know I belong here. I didn't respond. I didn't move. Look at me. My hands were shaking so badly I thought I'd dropped the booklet. Please. The word hung in the air, soft and pleading and wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. And then the voice changed. It wasn't mine anymore, it was Ethan's. Hey, I need help. I'm stuck in the hallway. Can you open the door? My breath caught. I wanted to look. I wanted to see if it was really him, if he was really there. But I knew he wasn't. I knew it was the thing. And it knew I knew. The voice shifted again, this time to Caroline's. You're making a mistake. You need to answer the phone. Someone's in danger. I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to stay still. The voice cycled through more people. Martin, guests I'd checked in, people I'd never met. Each one trying a different angle, a different tone, a different plea. And then it stopped. The silence returned, thick and oppressive. I waited. 1 minute, 2. And then the wet footprints started again, but this time they weren't circling. They were crossing the tile boundary. Drip, step, drip, step. I heard the carpet squelch softly under invisible weight. The thing was inside the lobby. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The footsteps moved closer, stopping just on the other side of the desk, inches from where I stood. I felt cold air brush against the back of my neck. And then, in a voice that wasn't a voice, more like the absence of sound, like words carved out of silence, it spoke. Room 17. The lights went out, not flickered, not dimmed. They died completely, plunging the lobby into absolute darkness. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then I felt it. Something cold and wet was pressing against my hand where it rested on the desk, like fingers. I yanked my hand back, stumbling away from the desk, my back hitting the wall. The darkness was total. And then, impossibly, I saw light. Not from the lobby, not from the windows, from the hallway. A faint green-tinged glow like bioluminescence, spilling out from the corridor leading to the guest rooms. I could see shapes moving in the light, silhouettes, figures. They stood in the hallway, perfectly still, facing the lobby. One of them stepped forward. It was the man from earlier, the one dripping with seawater. Behind him I saw others. The woman in the white sun hat, a child in soaking wet clothes, an old man with seaweed tangled in his hair. They all stared at me, and then in unison they turned and walked toward the end of the hallway, toward room 17. The door to room 17 was open, and inside I could see water, an impossible, endless black ocean stretching beyond the frame of the door, defying every law of space and reason. The figures stepped inside one by one and disappeared into the water without a splash. The last one, the man, turned back to look at me. He smiled, and then he stepped through the door and it closed behind him. The green light faded, the hallway went dark, and the lobby lights flickered back on. I stood there, gasping, my entire body shaking. The phone rang one last time. I looked at the caller ID. Room 17. This time I didn't hesitate. I reached over and unplugged the phone from the wall. The ringing stopped. The building settled, and for the first time that night I felt like I could breathe. But I knew, deep down, in a place I couldn't rationalize away, that I hadn't won. I'd just survived. For now. The sun rose at 6:47 a.m., spilling orange light through the front windows of the lobby and painting the teal carpet in warm, normal colors. Outside, the Gulf sparkled as if nothing had happened. A family loaded beach gear into their SUV. A jogger passed by on the access road, headphones in, oblivious. Everything looked fine, but I could still smell the seawater. Faint, lingering, like it had soaked into the walls and couldn't be scrubbed out. I sat at the desk, staring at the unplugged phone, my hands still trembling. I'd made it through the night. I'd followed the rules, I'd refused the invitations, I'd survived. But I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd barely escaped. At 7:02 a.m., Martin walked in, coffee in hand, looking as tired and worn as always. He glanced at me, then at the unplugged phone, then back at me. "Rough night?" he asked. I laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You could say that." He didn't ask for details, he never did. Instead, he set his coffee down and started his opening routine. Booting up the computer, checking the cash drawer, scanning the guest log. Normal, procedural, like nothing in this building was wrong. "Martin," I said, my voice hoarse, "I need to quit." He paused, his hand hovering over the keyboard. "Okay," he said quietly. "That's it? Just okay?" He looked at me with those tired, knowing eyes. "You lasted longer than most. 2 weeks is good." "I don't understand how you do this," I said. "How do you work here knowing what's in this building?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because someone has to," he finally said. "If we close, if we abandon the place, it spreads. We've tried before, locked it up, boarded the windows, walked away." He shook his head. 2 months later, people started reporting things in the motels down the road. Wet footprints, rooms that didn't exist, phones ringing from extensions that weren't installed. He looked at me. "The rules keep it contained. As long as someone's here following them, it stays in the building." I felt sick. "So I'm not protecting myself," I said. "I'm protecting everyone else." Martin didn't answer. He didn't need to. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a new schedule, sliding it across the desk toward me. I looked at it. My name was printed at the top next to the next 4 shifts, Thursday through Sunday, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And beside my name, handwritten in blue ink, was a note, "Room 17 always." I stared at it, my chest tightening. "What does that mean?" "It means it knows you now," Martin said. "It's marked you as part of the routine. If you stop showing up, it'll come looking for you." "That's insane." "Yeah." He took a sip of his coffee. As I looked at the schedule, at my name, at the ink that seemed too fresh, too deliberate. "What happened to Ethan?" I asked quietly. Martin's expression darkened. "Same thing that happens to everyone who breaks the rules. He went into room 17, he didn't come out, and now..." He hesitated. "Now he's part of it." "Part of it? You've seen him, haven't you? Heard him?" I thought about the wet footsteps, the voice that sounded like Ethan asking to be let back in. "That wasn't really him," I said. "No," Martin agreed, "but it used to be." I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Martin asked. "Home," I said. "To sleep, to think, to figure out what the hell I'm going to do." He nodded. "See you tonight." I stopped in the doorway and turned back. What if I don't come back? Martin looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Then we'll add your name to the list," he said quietly, "and we'll find someone else." I walked out into the morning light, got into my car, and drove home in silence. But when I got to my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch, staring at the wall, trying to process everything that had happened. And then at 12:40 p.m., hours before my next shift in the full light of day, I smelled it. Seawater. I stood up, heart racing, and looked around my apartment. Everything was normal. The windows were closed. The air conditioning was running. But the smell was there. Unmistakable. I walked into my bedroom and stopped. There, on the floor beside my bed, was a single wet footprint. Fresh, dark. The water is still pooling at the edges. I backed out of the room, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I grabbed my phone and called Carolyn. She answered immediately. "It followed me home," I said, my voice shaking. "I know," she said. "What do I do?" "You go back," she said. "You work your shift, you follow the rules, and you hope it gets bored. And if it doesn't?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Then you become part of the building," she said. "Like the others?" She hung up. I stood there in my apartment, staring at the wet footprint, and I realized the truth. The rules weren't just instructions, they were chains. And I was already caught. That night, I went back to the Coastal House Inn. I sat behind the desk, opened the booklet, and waited. At 12:40 a.m., the smell of seawater returned. And I didn't run. I couldn't. Because now I understood the hotel didn't let you leave. It just made you think you had a choice. 3 months passed. I stopped counting the nights. They all blurred together. An endless loop of locked doors, ringing phones, wet footprints that evaporated by dawn. I followed the rules. I didn't look when I heard footsteps. I didn't answer when room 17 called. I didn't acknowledge the figures I sometimes saw on the security monitors, standing motionless in hallways that stretched too far. I became efficient, mechanical. I stopped going home between shifts. There was no point. The smell of seawater followed me everywhere. My apartment, my car, the grocery store. It was always there, faint but undeniable. A reminder that I wasn't off the clock. Not really. Caroline checked on me once a week. She never asked how I was doing. She just looked at me, nodded, and left a fresh copy of the booklet on the desk in case mine got too worn. Martin stopped talking to me about anything other than schedules and supply orders. He'd see me in the morning, exhausted and hollow-eyed, and he'd just slide the next week's shifts across the counter without a word. I started adding my own rules to the booklet, small things at first. If the hallway lights flicker 3 times, turn off the monitor. If you hear knocking from the supply closet, do not open it until sunrise. If a guest asks for extra towels after 1 a.m., give them washcloths instead. I didn't know if they helped, but writing them down made me feel like I had some control, like I was learning the patterns, adapting, surviving. But I wasn't living. I'd stopped calling my brother, stopped answering texts from friends. I told myself it was to protect them, that the thing in the building might follow me to them, but the truth was simpler. I didn't know how to explain what I'd become. On a Tuesday in late December, a new hire arrived. Her name was Jessica, mid-20s, bright-eyed, nervous. She needed the job. Rent was overdue, car payments were piling up. The same story I'd told myself months ago. Martin walked her through the training while I sat at the desk, pretending to organize receipts. I watched him hand her the booklet. I watched her flip through it, her expression shifting from confusion to nervous laughter. "Is this for real?" she asked, smiling. Martin didn't smile back. "Just follow the rules, exactly as they're written." She looked at me like she expected me to laugh, to tell her it was a joke. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, and I saw the moment her smile faltered. She saw something in my eyes, something that made her uneasy, because she could tell I wasn't joking. That night, Jessica worked her first shift alongside me. Martin wanted me to train her, to show her the ropes, to ease her into the routine. But I didn't talk much. I just pointed at the booklet and said, "Read it. Memorize it. Don't test it." She nodded, trying to stay upbeat, but I could see the cracks forming already. The way she glanced at the hallway was a little too often. The way she flinched when the air conditioning kicked on. At 12:40 a.m., the smell of seawater filled the lobby. Jessica looked up, confused. "Do you smell that?" "Check the doors," I said flatly. "Not the hallway." She hesitated, then did as I said. When she came back, she looked pale. "The doors are locked. Where's it coming from?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "Ignore it." She sat down slowly, her hands shaking. This is real, isn't it?" I didn't answer. The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. Room 17. Jessica looked at the caller ID, then at me. "Should I?" "No," I said. The phone rang 15 times before it stopped. Jessica didn't ask any more questions that night. When her shift ended and the sun came up, she walked out of the lobby without saying goodbye. I knew she wouldn't come back. But 2 days later, she did. She walked into the lobby at 11 p.m., her face drawn and tired, and I knew immediately that something had changed. "I smelled it," she said quietly, standing in front of the desk. "In my apartment last night at 12:40. I nodded. "It followed me home." "Yeah," I said. "It does that." Her hands were shaking. "What do I do?" I slid the booklet across the desk toward her. "You come back," I said. "You follow the rules. And you hope it gets bored." She stared at the booklet, her eyes filling with tears. "I can't do this," she whispered. "You don't have a choice," I said. She looked at me, and I saw the same hollow recognition in her eyes that I'd seen in Martin's, in Caroline's. She sat down beside me, opened the booklet, and started reading, and I realized with a cold, creeping certainty that I'd become what Martin had been to me: a guide, a warning, a ghost in training. We worked in silence that night, and when dawn came, I pulled out the booklet and added one more rule in fresh ink. If you think you're off the clock, you're already in the hallway. Jessica read it over my shoulder and said nothing, because she already knew it was true. A week later, I was sitting at the desk during my shift when I heard it. A soft, polite knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, coming from inside the walls. I didn't look up. I didn't acknowledge it. I just kept my eyes on the booklet, my hands steady, and I waited for sunrise. Because that's what you do at the Coastal House Inn. You follow the rules. You ignore the invitations. And you hope, desperately, uselessly, that one day the thing in the walls will finally let you go. But deep down, I knew the truth. It never would. Because I wasn't just working at the Coastal House anymore. I was part of it. And the rules would keep getting longer, one name at a time.